Book review. Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. Bonnie Garmus's Lessons in Chemistry is literary debut that defies convention in every sense. It's sharp, heartfelt, and slyly subversive novel that shines spotlight on the plight of women in the 1960s, especially those who dared to exist beyond the kitchen and challenge male-dominated fields. At its core, the novel is a triumphant blend of science, satire, feminist critique, and emotional point, driven by an unforgettable protagonist, Elizabeth Zott. Plot summary. Set in the early 1960s, Lessons in Chemistry is a compelling, witty, and deeply moving novel that follows the life of Elizabeth Zott, brilliant and unconventional chemist who challenges the deeply ingrained sexism of her era. Elizabeth Zott is not your typical woman of the time. Fiercely intelligent, independent-minded scientist, Elizabeth works in male-dominated research lab, Hastings Research Institute, where her talents are constantly overlooked and her ideas are often stolen or dismissed by her male colleagues. Despite holding master's degree and deep passion for chemistry, she is treated as lab technician rather than a full-fledged scientist. At Hastings, Elizabeth meets Calvin Evans, a socially awkward but highly respected Nobel-nominated scientist. Unlike the others, Calvin recognizes and values Elizabeth's intellect and independence. The two develop a romantic relationship grounded in mutual respect, shared curiosity, and intellectual partnership. Their bond is intense and genuine, but short-lived. Calvin tragically dies in freak accident, leaving Elizabeth devastated and pregnant. In the wake of Calvin's death, Elizabeth is left to raise her daughter, Madeline, nicknamed Matt, alone in a world hostile to single mothers and professional women. With her scientific career stymied and struggling to make ends meet, Elizabeth reluctantly accepts a job as the host of a daytime television cooking show called Supper at 6. The producers expect her to be a cheerful domestic housewife, teaching recipes to other women. However, Elizabeth approaches cooking as delivering scientific explanations and empowering messages that revolutionize how our audience sees both cooking and themselves. Through Supper at 6, Elizabeth becomes an unlikely feminist icon. She encourages women to challenge societal expectations, pursue education, and believe in their worth beyond the home. Her straightforward, logical approach and refusal to conform earn her a massive following among women across the country, but also criticism from men who feel threatened by her growing influence. Meanwhile, young Matt is no ordinary child, precociously intelligent. Curious, she begins to investigate her father's past, sensing that there's more to the story than her mother has told her. With the help of supportive neighbor Harriet Sloan and quirky rescued dog named 630, who becomes surprisingly insightful character in his own right, the family builds a circle of support and resilience. As Elizabeth continues to break barriers, she also grapples with her past traumas, including a history of sexual assault and rejection by the academic establishment. She eventually uncovers the truth behind Calvin's mysterious background, including his abandonment as a child and the manipulations of his estranged family. The novel culminates in Elizabeth's decision to leave Supper at 6 at the height of its popularity, choosing instead to return to science research on her own terms. She helps establish a lab where women are given opportunities denied them elsewhere, continuing her mission of transforming science and society from the inside out. Through sharp prose, satirical humor, and emotionally resonant storytelling, Lessons in Chemistry highlights the absurdities and injustices of mid-century gender roles. It celebrates the power of resilience, intellect, and integrity in the face of systemic inequality. Elizabeth Zott is an unforgettable protagonist, fiercely rational, deeply principled, and unintentionally charismatic, who becomes a beacon of hope for those stifled by tradition and expectation. Bonnie Garmus deftly blends historical fiction, feminist commentary, and personal drama into a novel that is both entertaining and thought-provoking. Lessons in Chemistry reminds readers that progress often begins with one person who refuses to accept the status quo, and that science, like life, is best approached with curiosity, courage, and a little bit of rebellion. Plot overview. Set primarily in Southern California during the 1950s and early 1960s, the novel follows Elizabeth Zott, a brilliant chemist navigating a world that refuses to accept her intellect and independence. After being ousted from a career in science due to systemic sexism and personal tragedy, she finds herself the reluctant star of the daytime cooking show, but Elizabeth refuses to play the docile, smiling housewife. She transforms her kitchen into a chemistry lab and uses her platform to teach women the science behind cooking and, more importantly, the science behind their own power. Her journey becomes not only a battle against outdated gender roles, also reclamation of voice, autonomy, and truth. Character development. Elizabeth Zott. A force of nature, Elizabeth Zott is a literary heroine unlike any other Logical, principled, fierce, and unyielding in her values, Garmus crafts her with precision that mirrors Elizabeth's own scientific mind. She is not warm or traditionally likable in the way female protagonists are often expected to be. Instead, she's stubborn, direct, and unapologetically intelligent. These qualities, which should command respect, often isolate her, but they also make her a magnetic figure both within and beyond the pages of the novel. What sets Elizabeth apart is her relentless consistency. Even in the face of repeated institutional and personal obstacles, including workplace harassment, romantic loss, and single motherhood, she never dilutes her identity to please others. Garmus avoids the trope of the woman who softens over time. Instead, Elizabeth evolves by becoming even more herself. Calvin Evans, the ideal ally. Calvin Evans, Elizabeth's partner and fellow chemist, is Nobel-nominated genius who genuinely sees Elizabeth as an intellectual equal. Their relationship is one of mutual respect and serves as poignant counterpoint to the patriarchal structures that otherwise dominate the novel. Calvin's social awkwardness and emotional wounds add depth to his character, and his untimely death is both devastating and pivotal. Elizabeth's transformation from scientist to reluctant public figure. Supporting characters, the supporting cast, especially Madeline, Harriet Sloane, the neighbor, and even 630, the family dog, add richness to the story. Matt is precocious, reflective of Elizabeth's legacy, and offers child's perspective on adult hypocrisy. Harriet provides the warmth and friendship Elizabeth initially resists, demonstrating the quiet power of female solidarity. And 630, with his own inner monologue, is one of the most original and charming elements in the novel. Used by Garmus as both comic relief and an emotional anchor. Themes in social commentary, feminism, and gender inequality. The most dominant theme in Lessons in Chemistry is undoubtedly feminism. Garmus takes the scalpel to mid-century misogyny, revealing how it infiltrates every aspect of life. From scientific institutions to television studios to parenting, Elizabeth's experiences are illustrative of real-world limitations placed on women, especially in male-dominated fields like STEM. Refusal to accept. Woman's place becomes a radical act of defiance and powerful message to readers across generations. Yet the novel's feminist stance is not limited to Elizabeth's personal fight. Through her journey, Garmus critiques the entire societal infrastructure. From lack of legal protections for working mothers to the condescending expectations of women's programming, Elizabeth's scientific explanations of cooking on supper at 6 symbolize her claiming of intellectual authority, demonstrating that science isn't only for labs. It's for everyone. Science as metaphor and liberation. Chemistry in the novel is more than a career or hobby. It's metaphor for transformation, discovery, and resistance. Elizabeth sees the world through the lens of empirical evidence and scientific rigor, which often puts her at odds with social norms. But this same lens also provides clarity and understanding in justice and inequality. Her chemistry lessons during supper at 6 blur the line between domesticity and intellect, sending a message that women can and should be allowed to engage with complex ideas. Garmus cleverly uses scientific analogies to explain human behavior, relationships, and social structures, underscoring the novel's belief in rational progress. Grief and resilience, though laced with humor and satire, the novel doesn't shy away from emotional depth. Elizabeth's grief after Calvin's death is palpable, made more complex by her pregnancy and lack of support. Garmus portrays grief not as a singular emotional event, but as a recurring presence that shapes decisions, relationships, and identity. What's remarkable is how grief and resilience are interwoven. Elizabeth doesn't merely recover. She adapts course and creates something new. Her growth is not about getting over it, but about finding meaning in unexpected places. Identity and authenticity. Throughout the novel, Garmus explores the cost of authenticity in a society that rewards conformity. Elizabeth is frequently punished for refusing to smile, wear lipstick, or dumb herself down. Yet her insistence on being fully herself, no matter the consequences, ultimately leads to empowerment not just for herself, but for the countless women who see themselves reflected in her televised rebellion. Narrative voice and style. Garmus's writing style is crisp, witty, and sharply observant. She blends third-person omniscient narration with shifting points of view, including the dog 630s, which creates layered and often humorous portrait of the world. The tone balances seriousness with satire, allowing Garmus to critique sexism and grief without becoming dour or heavy-handed. Her prose is economical yet rich with detail. Scientific terms are used, clarity, making chemistry accessible and relevant even to readers with no background in science. At the same time, emotional scenes are delivered with restraint, making their impact all the more profound. The dialogue is another strength. Quick, smart, and often laced with double meanings, Elizabeth's deadpan responses contrast beautifully with the patronizing tone of those around her, turning conversations into miniature battles of intellect and ideology. Historical context and setting set in post-war America during a time of booming consumerism and rigid social roles. Lessons in Chemistry captures the atmosphere of the 1950s and early 60s with accuracy and flair. The novel explores how gender norms were reinforced through media, advertising, and educational structures. It's no coincidence that Elizabeth becomes famous on television, medium that both constrained and amplified voices. The backdrop also includes subtle nods to political and scientific shifts of the time, from Cold War anxieties to the beginnings of second-wave feminism. While the novel focuses on one woman's personal journey, it gestures toward larger social changes that were just beginning to take root. Emotional and intellectual impact. What makes Lessons in Chemistry so powerful is how it manages to be both intellectually stimulating and emotionally resonant. Readers are encouraged to think critically about gender roles, the value of science, and the myths of meritocracy, all while becoming deeply invested in Elizabeth's personal story. There are moments of deep heartbreak, particularly surrounding Elizabeth's experiences of sexual violence and professional sabotage, but also triumphs that feel earned and authentic. Garmus offers no easy solutions, but she does offer hope that things can change and that women who refuse to shrink themselves are not anomalies, they're leaders. Critique and considerations. If there's any critique to be made, it may be that the novel at times leans heavily into its message, bordering on didacticism. Some characters, especially villains, are painted with broad strokes, and certain plot developments, such as the dog's vocabulary or the television career arc, require touch of suspension of disbelief. However, these elements also contribute to the novel's charm and satirical edge. The balance between realism and exaggeration is intentional, and Garmus navigates it with confidence. Still, readers looking for gritty realism might find certain resolutions a bit too tidy. Conclusion. Lessons in Chemistry is a triumphant, genre-defying novel that blends feminist literature, scientific curiosity, and emotional truth into a cohesive and deeply satisfying story. Elizabeth Zott stands alongside the most memorable literary heroines, not because she conforms to expectations, but because she dismantles them with logic, grace, and uncompromising authenticity. Bonnie Garmus has crafted a debut that feels both timeless. It challenges, it entertains, and it inspires. Whether you're a scientist, reader of historical fiction, fan of strong female leads, or simply someone hungry for fresh voice, Lessons in Chemistry is not to be missed.